Hello, everyone, and welcome to our program today, Jews, Freemasons, and a 19th Century Debate on Universality. My name is Rachel King. I am the Executive Director of the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center at American Ancestors, and I will be your moderator today. The Jewish Heritage Center is an archive and educational center dedicated to preserving the Jewish history of New England, connecting people to their Jewish heritage, and illuminating the American Jewish experience for wide audiences like this one. We are located in Boston at American Ancestors, or as some of you know it, New England Historic Genealogical Society, which is a national center for history, heritage, and culture. Today, we'll be learning about Jewish American participation in Freemasonry and a pivotal historical event that took place in Boston in the 19th century. But before we get started, I'd just like to make a few notes about this webinar. You in the audience are muted and off camera, but we'd love to hear from you. We hope that you will type in your questions and comments into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And we will try to get to as many as we can following the presentation. I also want to mention that as we are broadcasting from different locations today, we hope you will bear with us if we experience any technical difficulties. And if you miss anything on your end or on ours, we will be sending you a link to the full recording to watch afterward. So now to turn to today's presentation. At the Jewish Heritage Center, we were first drawn to the connection between Jews and Freemasonry when we discovered that our archives contain certificates of Masonic membership for several Jewish individuals in Greater Boston from the 19th century onward. We wanted to learn more about this connection, and so we are especially pleased to gain insight today from Dr. Peter Lanchidi, who is a foremost authority on the subject. Dr. Lanchidi is a tenured assistant professor in the Institute of Art History at Ütvös University in Budapest. He earned his PhD in the Department of Jewish Thought at Ben-Gurion University in Israel. He also studied art history and aesthetics at Budapest University and Jewish studies at Stockholm and Heidelberg universities. His current research focuses on the interface between Freemasonry and Kabbalah in 19th century visual material and its historical and cultural contexts. He joins us today, or tonight really, from Budapest, where it is actually late this evening. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Peter Lanchidi, and welcome.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. Okay, so we start, right? Okay, good evening. So let me share my screen, my presentation. And yes. Okay, so here we go. So I will be speaking about Jews, Freemasons, and the 19th century debate on universality, and to what extent it's connected to Boston, you're going to find out very soon. So let me start with two quotations. We, the undersigned Master Masons, professing the Jewish religion, respectfully petition your most worshipful body, the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, to remove certain disabilities which debar us from uniting with you on the grand level of universal fellowship. And another one, Jews may become Masons, only that the Jewish brother must reverently bow and respond to Christian prayers. He must pretend to venerate Christian saints and must submit patiently to be bored by the prating of worshipful Dr. Cantwell's or the Reverend Brother Moorworm's dissertations about the blood of the Lamb. In 1851, Jacob Norton, a Jewish Freemason in Boston wrote an appeal on behalf of his fellow Jewish Freemasons for a more universalistic understanding of Masonic identity. 15 years later, his tone had changed, and he complained that Jews were marginalized within the order by explicitly Christian prayers and lectures. The difference between Norton's two statements reflects both a personal story and a communal one, centering around a sectarian debate which concerned the meaning of religion and universality within Freemasonry. The debate pitted Universalist Jewish and non-Jewish brethren against conservative Christian Masons. Evolving from a petition authored by Norton and signed by 6 Jewish brethren in 1851, it signaled the emergence of a Jewish Masonic consciousness. Ultimately, the Jewish press entered the debate, which thereby transcended closed Masonic circles and assumed relevance for society at large. Started officially in London in 1717, Freemasonry, with its universal and cosmopolitan outlook, provided Jews one of the few, and by its cultural prestige and societal prominence, the most important platforms for social relations with non-Jews. While in German lands, especially in Prussia, Jews were excluded from Freemasonry, in most of Europe and the US as well, they were not discriminated against. The reason for such Jewish concerns in general for US Jewry's keen interest and involvement in Masonry already from the 18th century is clear for many sources. In the New World, just like in Europe, mainly in England, Freemasonry provided a unique opportunity for Jews to socialize in a non-Jewish environment with people from all walks of life. In the heydays of American Freemasonry, from the end of the Civil War until the First World War, Jews joined the ranks of the fraternity in increasing numbers. Gentile clubs in the main discriminated against Jews, hence Jews established not only Jewish clubs modeled on non-Jewish ones, but a number of Masonry-inspired fraternities, the most renowned and successful being Bnei Brit. Attests to their popularity in Jewish circles the following excerpt from a retrospect on Jewish Boston from 1889. Within a short space of time, following the installation of the first Bnei Brit Lodge in 1856, rival orders such as the Free Sons of Israel, Kesher Shel Barzel, the Sons of Benjamin, the Sons of Abraham, and others made their appearance and established their lodges also in the city. For a number of years, lodge matters were the topic of the daily conversation among Boston Israelites, and whenever an election of officers took place in any of the lodges, the members were thrown into a fever. It is this significance of Masonry to Jews that induced the Jewish brethren in Boston to petition the Grand Lodge. However, even where Jews were not barred from the fraternity, Jewish participation in Freemasonry did not always come without its challenges. And this is where the sectarian debate starts. Jacob Norton, the protagonist of our story, was born in Poland and first emigrated to England, where he was initiated into Joppa Lodge at London in 1839. In 1842, he sailed to the US and settled in Boston, where he established himself as a successful farrier, got married in 1844, and became a leading member of the local Jewish community. He also joined one of the most prestigious and oldest Masonic lodges of New England, the Lodge of St. Andrew, that was chartered by the Grand Lodge of Scotland in 1769. St. Andrew's Lodge had been recommended to Norton by Charles Whitlock Moore, a prominent Masonic journalist best known for his Freemasons Monthly magazine, which he started in 1841 and edited until his death in 1873. Norton, who was well posted in regard to the ritual of the Grand Lodge of England, furnished Moore with more information in regard to the English ritual than he had ever obtained from any members of the fraternity from abroad before. The two developed an intimate friendship. Moore held rather liberal views when it came to Masonic principles. For instance, in a defense of Masonry against the charges of secrecy, a central theme in the anti-Masonic campaign of the 1820s and 30s, he pointed out that Freemasonry teaches no religious dogmas. I quote, "It interferes with no man's religious opinions. Sectarians have nothing to hope and nothing to fear from it on this account." End of quote. The 1851 petition of Norton was prompted by two affairs related to Masonic prayers. In April 1851, the St. Andrew's Lodge called upon those of its members who had habitually missed meetings either to attend or to resign their membership. To this, one Jewish Mason replied, "I must acknowledge that I have not taken as active a part as I would gladly have done, but I did so on account of the sectarian expressions in your ritual, which I cannot repeat consistently with my religious belief." Furthermore, when a Jewish neophyte was presented for initiation, a prayer was offered by the chaplain suitable to a Christian church. A chaplain is an officer of the lodge in some Masonic jurisdictions to offer prayers or to read scripture. The chaplain who brought his pulpit into the lodge was Reverend George Maxwell Randall, an Episcopalian clergyman and the rector of the Church of the Messiah in Boston. As a churchman, he devotedly spread the gospel and tirelessly worked for the benevolent causes, including the establishment of educational institutions. As a Mason, Randall served as the chaplain of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, as well as of St. Andrew's Lodge, and later he also served as Grand Master of the Grand Lodge. Randall apparently influenced the shift away from Boston Masonry's earlier universalist outlook. In his missionary zeal, he made a practice of incorporating the name of Christ or allusion to him in the prayers offered in the lodge. His Christian take on Masonry made its way into one of the most important Masonic monitors of the time. Monitors are manuals or guides to rituals developed from early Masonic catechisms. This monitor was Moore's Masonic trestle board. That Moore was a member of Randall's church and a close friend might explain how Randall's Christian allusions ended up in the lodge prayer in Moore's monitor. The most notable sectarian addition to the prayer at opening the lodge was references to the Holy Spirit and thy Son. In addition to the prayer issue, a customary dedication of lodges to saints was also contested by the Jewish brethren. The Grand Lodge referred the petition to a committee, which rejected it, whereupon Norton and the other petitioners withdrew from St. Andrew's Lodge. One important factor in the case was that Randall, the chief transgressor in the matter complained of, was the appointed chairman of the committee. As someone put it, in fact, the lamb was sent for judgment to the wolf. Though the petition was made in 1851, it was not until 1855 that the public debate on sectarianism started. What made it possible for an internal affair of a close fraternity to evolve into a public matter discussed widely in the press was the rise of a Masonic public sphere, and then the joining of the Jewish press. The two most influential Masonic publications were Moore's already mentioned Freemasons Monthly Magazine in Boston, and another Moore's, Cornelius Moore's Masonic Review in Cincinnati. Established in the 1840s, these two periodicals, unquestionably of conservative bent, constituted the two pillars of Masonic journalism in the US. Hence, news of the Norton affair reached the Masonic public only through the filters of these two conservative organs. Both printed the commission report on the Norton petition, but not the petition itself. This was the state of affairs within which the first petition was presented to the Grand Lodge in 1851. Accordingly, the efficacy of such an internal document in achieving the desired aim was rather limited, to say the least. In consequence, the sectarian controversy was a domestic affair confined to the fraternity. And this is exactly the point where the issue of public sphere assumes significance. For the public opinion to form, the most important prerequisite was the emergence of the public sphere. The most fundamental platform for it was the press, informing the public of the existence of topical issues and the presentation of opinions, that is, the possibility of open discussion for an informed audience, was the most decisive factor in turning the sectarian issue into a polemic. The public sphere created a completely new reality and effected a change in the mentality of both Jewish and non-Jewish brethren, and that of the wider non-Masonic audience. This new reality arrived with the appearance of the liberal voice in the public sphere. The 1850s saw a spate of new Masonic publications. Indeed, the 1850s and 60s were the first heyday of Masonic journalism. During these decades, about 70 new Masonic periodicals emerged, compared to the fewer than 20 in the previous 2 decades. In the context of the sectarian debate, the most important new Masonic periodical was the Acacia. Started in 1855, this pioneer universalist organ was a forum where the cosmopolitans could first have their voice heard. The Ashlar, another universalist Masonic periodical, started that same year and also joined the debate. Its mission statement, proclaiming openly its liberal stance and universalist character, is worth quoting here. It has been our constant endeavor from the commencement of the Ashlar to exert an influence against the introduction into the work and lectures of Masonry or the practices of the Lodge, anything which will tend to contract our institution and deprive it of its universality. The engagement of the Jewish press brought the debate to an entirely different level. More specifically, the entree of the Israelite into the exchange was a game changer. By the way, Isaac Mayer Weiss, the editor of the Israelite, the flagship organ of Jewish egalitarian movement in the US, was himself a Freemason. This was large part due to the fact that of all American Jewish periodicals, the Israelite had the widest circulation. In the 7 antebellum years of its existence, from 1854 to 61, the Israelite reached most of the settlement points contained in the total distribution of subscriptions of all Jewish newspapers. It was distributed in 860 of the 986 Jewish locals. Hence, it played a major role in spreading awareness about the sectarian debate beyond the ranks of Freemasonry. In fact, it was the Israelite that printed Norton's petition for the first time, more than 4 years after its submission. In doing so, the Israelite labeled the committee's report a document that would do honor to the followers of Ignatius Loyola. Once the affair became a matter of public controversy, more and more articles appeared on the topic and got reprinted in a growing number of periodicals. These periodicals not only monitored the Masonic press, but customarily, for the times, also reprinted from each other, articles appearing often in 3, 4, or 5 different journals. Like-minded organs acclaimed and promoted each other. For instance, the Israelite wrote, I quote, "We have many good Masonic periodicals which advocate the true principles of Masonry, among which is the Masonic Mirror and Keystone, an able paper edited by one of our co-religionists." This co-religionist was none other than Leon Heinemann, a prominent Freemason in Philadelphia and Masonic journalist, author, and editor. Highly acclaimed publications of Heinemann included the Masonic Library, which made reprints of the fundamental works of Freemasonry readily available to any brother at affordable price, the Universal Masonic Record, and the World's Masonic Register. However, he is mostly remembered for his weekly Masonic journal, the Masonic Mirror, which was started at Philadelphia in 1852 and subsequently absorbed the American Keystone and continued through 1860. It was acclaimed as one of the most influential weeklies ever given to the craft. The articles were bold and incisive, and to them is due much of the passing away of Masonic superstition. The Israelite, however, was not always in good terms with all Masonic journals, as was the case with the like-minded Masonic Mirror and Keystone. A heated debate developed between the liberal Jewish Weekly and one of the leading Masonic journals, namely the conservative Masonic Review in Cincinnati, which was home to both journals. After the first articles on sectarianism appeared in the Israelite, the Masonic Review rebuked the Israelite for interfering with Masonic matters. Of late, the Israelite seems to have assumed the guardianship of Masonry in addition to Judaism, and has been reading the craft, meaning Freemasonry, some earnest lectures upon certain improprieties which the Israelite claims they have been guilty of. The Masonic Review also accused Jewish brethren of wanting to compel Christians to pray like Jews. A Jewish Mason by the name Wechsler, who is no doubt Rabbi Judah Wechsler, replied in the Israelite that I have often been surprised when visiting lodges to see how the great principles of Masonry were forgotten, the lodge being more like a church. And I am of the opinion that Brother Moore knows better, but as most of his readers are Christians, he thought to give a decision to please them. To my Jewish brethren of the fraternity, I would suggest you should not support such a journal any longer. The fight became increasingly personal, and the Masonic Review qualified Wechsler's article too low to merit a reply, as its author is unworthy the notice of a gentleman or the regard of a Mason. Wechsler retorted that as Moore is the editor of the Masonic paper, he must have came to the conclusion that nobody but him knows about Masonry and its principles. And strange to say, his writings show that he has not yet comprehended its first principles, the universality of the order. The years following the Civil War brought a new wave of liberal Masonic journals. For instance, the Masonic Monthly and the National Freemason, which magnified attention to the question of sectarianism. Significantly, the former was published in Boston, the stronghold of Massachusetts Masonry. The cosmopolitan attitude of the Masonic Monthly transpires from the words of its editor, and I quote, and they also quote bring a letter of Jacob Norton. So it says, Brother Jacob Norton's letter in our last have opened the discussion of a broad question. We might have called it the Jewish question, but that would have been too unwisely and unjustly discriminate where the Jews is no more concerned than the Christian, the Protestant, the Catholic, or the members of any of the sects of Christianity, or the professors of any among the numerous religions and creeds which divide mankind. The ideological stance of the post-Civil War liberal Masonic periodical, the National Freemason, is well illustrated by a long imaginary court case that it ran in 12 installments in 1866 and 1867. Essentially, it was an extended presentation of the issues at stake in the Norton affair. Judging from the author's acerbic style, his fondness for fictitious characters, his conversance with Masonic topics, and his clear interest with the sectarian question in general, and the Norton case in particular, the author was likely none other than Norton himself. The title itself says it all. Low Intelligence, Supreme Court of Masonic Public Opinion, before Chief Justice Common Sense, Jewish Brethren versus American Freemasonry. The mocking and ridiculing of his adversaries in a sharp and forthright style had been by then become the trademark of Norton's polemical style. The piece well illustrates his predilection for nicknames too. Most of the jurors consisted of brethren whose names are most honorably known: Brother Leo Love, Brother Relief, Brother Truth. But I cannot help suspecting that there were at least two of them who, being church members, were apt to be fanatically disposed. I mean Brothers Faith and Hope. The fictional case's illustrious witnesses included many of those involved in the Norton case, such as Moore, Randall, or Norton himself. The witnesses were chosen carefully so that through their testimonies, not only the particularities of the Norton case and the issues of the sectarian debate could be presented, but it gave him the opportunity to embark upon historical and theoretical forays into the maze of Masonic science, and thus to educate his audience about the correct understanding of original Masonry. It is of great importance that the whole series was reprinted both in the Masonic Monthly and in the Israelite. The Israelite remarked that the author of these articles perfectly coincides with us on the spirit of Freemasonry, and emphatically added that the editor of the National Freemason is a liberal and excellent a man as there is in the land. Masonic Israelites should not fail to subscribe to the National Freemason. The increased interest in Masonic matters among Jews is aptly demonstrated by the fact that the sectarian debate appeared on the radar of the leading organ of American conservative Jewry, the prestigious Jewish Messenger. Although the weekly started in 1957, it was not until 1866 that Masonic sectarianism appeared in its columns. What is more, the Jewish Messenger even launched a Masonic department, a column that covered all sorts of Masonic matters, from elected officers to addressing ladies, and from in memoriam pieces to anecdotes. As Jewish Masonic consciousness rose, Jewish brethren were more willing to agitate for their rights in the order. The Israelite, in explaining why it republished Norton's fictitious court case from the National Freemason, declared, and I quote, "We copy these articles for Jewish Freemasons to afford them the opportunity, in case of need, to make proper use thereof in their respective lodges." Now, let me give you a short overview of some of the main lines of Christian and Jewish arguments. When it comes to lodge prayers, the 1852 report on the Jewish petition claimed that, and I quote, "to permit a Jew to pray as he pleases and to compel the Christian to pray as the Jew does, and only as the Jew does, would be wrong and oppressive." Facing such accusations, Jews attempted to clarify their position vis-à-vis the prayers by providing definitions for a Christian, a Hebrew, and a universal prayer. A Christian prayer, besides God, has references to Jesus Christ, while a Hebrew prayer has only reference to God. Although such is based on a Hebrew foundation, yet it has, at the same time, the character of a universal prayer, because all Masons believe in the existence of a God, and there is nothing which interferes with the religion of anyone. Concerning lodge dedications to saints, the debate centered around the question whether the dedications were made with religious motivations in mind, or were made to them as bright exemplars of all those virtues which Masons are taught to reverence and practice. Theological questions also made inroads into the debate. Another way of rejecting the pleas of Jewish brethren was to point out that, and I quote, "If Masonry be universal, it can only be applied to a universal religion, which Judaism confessedly is not." In contrast to Jewish particularism, the Catholic nature of Christianity was accentuated. Christian triumphalism was met with Jewish triumphalism, which, as it was argued, was warranted by its pristine values on which stood Christianity. A common thread running through the reasoning on both sides was reliance on historical arguments, which were to lend legitimacy to the contending parties. The pair of concepts through which Masonic historical questions were approached was the landmark and innovation. Landmarks are key elements and traditional characteristics of Freemasonry. Accordingly, what is not a landmark, it is an innovation, which became something equivalent of a curse word. No official definition or list of landmarks existed, and hence there was no agreement between the Masonic authors on the nature and content of this concept. In the like manner, the meaning of innovation, the flip side of landmark, was equally difficult to ascertain. However, every writer and commentator on Masonic issues had a great amount of confidence talking about them. Given the elusive nature of this central concept, landmarks were standard points of references in debates for all sides by which the validity of claims and arguments were thought to be secured. Historical inquiries at the end boiled down to the question of the origin of Freemasonry. As is well known, Solomon's Temple lies at the heart of the fraternity's own founding myth. The story of the construction of the temple was fundamental to the Masonic tradition from its earliest years. The temple itself, its stones, and the working tools of the Masons all have multifaceted symbolical meanings in Masonry, and symbolical and allegorical references to them are prevalent equally in the oral and written traditions, the rituals, and the entire material culture of Freemasonry, in the architecture, lodge furnishing, regalia, visual material, and so on. This Solomonic heritage, carved as history, was an important asset in the hands of Jewish brethren in proving the Jewish origin of Freemasonry, and hence in discrediting the authenticity and legitimacy of Christian allusions in Masonry. The question of the Jewish origin of Masonry was customarily addressed by the Christian polemicist by going around the problem with the help of a classic theological argument, namely that every reference to the temple or Judaism is merely symbolical. Jewish brethren thought otherwise. For instance, the Israelite declared in an assertive manner that Masonry is a Jewish institution whose history, degrees, charges, passwords, and explanations are Jewish from the beginning to the end. It is impossible to be well posted in Masonry without having a Jewish teacher. Or, as a Jew, we cannot learn anything in the lodge that we did not know before. The San Francisco Hebrew dedicated a 3-part article to the subject, asserting that Freemasonry was instituted by the Jews and was, and I quote, framed, shaped, and modeled after the customs and manners of the Jewish mode of worship, end of quote. The aforementioned Leon Heinemann, editor of the Masonic periodical, the Masonic Mirror and Keystone, dedicated a whole book to the subject. His Origin of Freemasonry was a 177-page effort to prove the Jewish origin of the fraternity. In connection to the Jewish origin of Freemasonry narrative, I want to present a tool in the hands of the Jewish Freemasons that takes us to the visual dimension of the debate. And importantly, it is connected to Boston. The story, however, began in Paris. David Rosenberg, a Freemason rabbi, acquired a name for himself with his Kabbalistic Masonic lithographs that he made in the Paris of the July monarchy, that is in the 1830s and 40s. The rabbi, who was born in Tokaj, the famous Hungarian wine region, combined in his artworks Jewish and Masonic symbols in an original way. In 1841, the rabbi published a grandiose lithograph with the title Aperçu de l'origine du culte hébraïque, the origin of the rites and worship of the Hebrews. The print, which came with a 70-page explicatory volume, was conceived as a polemical piece in an ongoing debate on Jewish religious reform that kept French Jewry busy in those years. Rosenberg took a conservative stand in the debate, and to bolster his position, he tied the rites and worship of the Hebrews to the natural and supernatural phenomena with the help of Kabbalah. He argued that Jewish rites and worship existed from time immemorial and are engraved in nature, and hence they not only should not, but cannot be changed. This content is presented in a carefully calculated and didactic way on the lithograph. The visual and conceptual foundation of the print is the Ein Sof, the infinite God, surrounded by the Shem HaMeforash, the 72 hidden names of God. In the focus of the lithograph, we see a balcony with the view of creation. The terrestrial globe is emerging from the clouds below the Kabbalistic tree. The planets and the zodiac shed light on the celestial sphere. The upper section of the table is where the correspondences between the heavenly order in nature and Judaism is summarized. We see 4 concentric semicircles spanning across the facade, dedicated to 4 themes: the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the elements, planets, and the zodiac, the days of the week and the months, and the 4th considers the parts of the human body. Their harmony with the celestial sphere is demonstrated by the division of the semicircles into 3 cross-sections, correlating to the numbers 3, 7, and 12. These numbers bring to light the core correlations that hold the divine and the mundane worlds together, as revealed in the Sefer Yetzirah, an ancient Jewish book important for Kabbalists, that explains how God created the world with the 10 numbers and the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The entire text of the Sefer Yetzirah is inscribed into the 12 frames on the lintel, transforming it thereby into a connecting element between the universal heavenly order and our created world. The narrative scenes provide further confirmation to the overall organizing principle. We see the Passover dinner on the right. On the other side, Sukkot. In the lower right corner, the marriage ceremony. And on the opposite side, religious articles, Tefillin, Talit, and Tzitzit. Although there is nothing explicitly Masonic on the lithograph, or in the explication Rosenberg, 70-page booklet that Rosenberg wrote, Rosenberg did provide a Masonic interpretation of this artwork. In 1842, he published a supplementary explication to his lithograph in London in the Freemasons Quarterly Review. It came with the title, Explanation of an Engraving on the Origin of the Jewish Religion as Connected with the Mysteries of Freemasonry. Here, the rabbi spelled out at length just how the print in general and its Kabbalistic content and the Jewish rituals in particular are actually the allegorical depictions of the Masonic symbols and degrees and the ceremonies held by the Masons. The lithograph and its Masonic explication reached Boston already in the same year, 1842. It was there that a Jewish minister at the Ohabei Shalom synagogue, Max Wolf, obtained an impression of the lithograph, which attracted general attention, and therefore he republished the work in 1859 in New York, accompanied by the explicatory booklet in his English translation. The artwork was relithographed by none other than Julius Bean, the renowned cartographer and lithographer, who is remembered not only for his countless maps, but also for his chromolithographic edition of Audubon's Birds of America. He was also the long-standing president of Playbrit and his first historian. The American edition had a double life as well. Besides being a popularizer of Judaism by offering a panoramic view of Jewish rites and worship, it had a Masonic career as well. It was advertised in Heinemann's Masonic Mirror and Keystone, was sold as a Masonic work in Masonic retail shops, was on display in the Grand Lodge of New York, and Masonic lectures were delivered on it, among others by Thomas Starr King, the Universalist and Unitarian minister, and Osgood Church Wheeler, the father of Baptist Church in California. The lithograph was quickly mobilized to serve as a justification for the Jewish origin of Freemasonry narrative, and with the help of the artwork, the lecturers were, quoting, tracing the origin, working, and symbols of Masonic science to their biblical and ancient sources. Quote, the Jewish periodical, the San Francisco Weekly Gleaner, reported that, and I quote again, the expositions of Masonic symbols of Max Wolf gives to the whole sphere of Masonic emblems a deep sense and a freshness which we never thought them able to receive. The intelligent Mason will by these expositions profit considerably and view Masonry from a much higher standing point than is common among the craft. In conclusion, I would like to situate the debate in the wider historical context, which may be of particular interest to the audience. The events of both US Masonic history and that of Reformed Judaism followed the general trends both in time and in development. The Christianization of Masonry corresponds in time with that of the Second Great Awakening. Likewise, the quest for the de-Christianization of Masonry coincided with the Jewish anti-missionary struggles led by Isaac Mayer Weiss. It comes with little surprise then that the Israelite took its share in the Masonic sectarian debate. Illustrative of the embeddedness of the sectarian debate in the broader historical context are the main lines of arguments in the polemic. The parallels with the general narratives of Jewish-Christian relations in the US are salient on both sides. Masonry was pronounced to be Christian, faith in the Bible, and even the question of oath came up regularly in Masonic context. It seemed self-evident to many that the religion in which all men agree cannot be anything else but Christianity, the only religion with a universal character. Jewish brethren countered these claims by showing how and why Judaism was the origin of Freemasonry, and hence all the ritual symbols and first and foremost the moral values of Masonry were all Jewish. Masonic prayers were claimed to have Hebrew foundation and were yet universal. The noble institution of Freemasonry, according to this narrative, was only but one example of how the Jews contributed to the progress of civilization. That is, the Jewish struggle within American Freemasonry mirrored both the contentious issues and the opposing positions that characterized the wider Jewish-Christian relations in America. This hitherto overlooked chapter of both Masonic and American Jewish history not only accentuates these historical findings, but also the importance of Freemasonry to American Jews. Furthermore, it highlights the central characteristic of Jewish Americanism, the full internalization of the democratic principles of the Republic. In finishing my talk, I would like to give an illustrative example for this, namely a rejoinder of the Israelite to the sectarian opinion according to which Massachusetts Masonry is Christian and hence it merely tolerates Jews. They tolerate the Jew. We say this is falsehood. We tolerate the Massachusetts Episcopalians or any other sect. We have the same right to speak and think of them as they do of us, and treat them as they treat us. Hence, we tolerate them. There is no toleration in the United States because there is no ruling church. There is a constitution made by the people and for the people. Hence, none can say who is tolerating and who tolerates. We consider this a Republican principle. If Massachusetts Masons are at variance with republicanism, we would advise them to emigrate to Russia. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was fascinating and rich and deep and answered a number of my questions. Before we get to questions from the audience, and as a reminder to folks, please type your questions and comments into the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. I did just want to let you know about a couple of upcoming programs with the Jewish Heritage Center. On April 1st, we had a program about Jewish languages, their commonality and diversity with Dr. Sarah Bunin-Binor. And on Sunday, May 5th, we are presenting an author talk with Elizabeth White and Joanne Sliwa about a book hot off the presses, The Counterfeit Countess. You can learn about these and register at jewishheritagecenter.org/events. I will also note for those of you in the Boston area, please save the date for June 18th when we honor, we have a special benefit event honoring shoe designer, entrepreneur, and philanthropist Stuart Weitzman. Okay, let's turn to your questions. Please submit them in the Q&A panel. I will start with a comment from Annie, who says, "Thank you. Your talk is explaining how my ancestors hid their Jewish heritage. They fled Europe. For generations, my male ancestors were devoted to Freemasonry. Over time, I suspect they lost the connection. However, this explains so very much." I did want to ask, you mentioned the context, the greater context of sort of Jewish-Christian relations, conversations in this period in America. What was going on in other parts of the world? Freemasonry was very strong in Europe and in Great Britain. Was any of this kind of debate around sectarianism versus universality happening in other areas, or was this sort of a uniquely American phenomenon at this time?
No, it wasn't. This was happening also in Prussia, where Jews were not allowed to join the ranks of Freemasons. And there was a big protest in reverberating throughout Europe and even reaching America. So French, Holland, in the Netherlands, and also in England, Masonic lodges were protesting and sending letters. And also the American lodges were sending letters to the German lodges. So that was also happening in Europe. When it comes to the Christian content of prayers or Freemasonry, of course, was a Christian phenomenon. So it was born in England or Scotland, and there were several decades earlier there were similar trends in England. So it was de-Christianized, and it was became more universal, especially under the Duke of Sussex, the Grand Lodge of the Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England. But then there was also trends of re-Christianization. And so these trends, it was fluctuating between these poles, and really depending on where we are historically in time and space and geographically, you could have very different Freemasonries. In fact, there is no such thing as the Freemasonry or a Freemasonry. There are many kind of Freemasonries with many opposing trends both in toleration or their religious outlook, or whether they have mystical bents or more rational. So you have many kind of Freemasonries.
Thank you. We have a question here from Ben. How does the fact that Massachusetts had a Grand Master who was Jewish by this point in history play into the acceptance of Jewish persons by Freemasonry?
Well, in the US, to the best of my knowledge, there was no Jews are not excluded from Freemasonry. I mean, the whole debate grew out of the fact that actually Jews were members in the fraternity, but then they had these consciousness or conscious issues about the prayers. But they were just in England. I mean, obviously, Freemasonry arrived to the US from England, and even there, already in the 1730s, we know that Jews were members in lodges, and we also know by name one Jewish master mason. So Jews were members of lodges in England, and of course, with the military, it arrived to the US, and then Jews also joined the ranks. So, and especially later on in the heydays, there were many Jewish master mason, or even had positions in grand lodges, and there were many rabbis who were Freemasons. So if I don't know if that was exactly the question, but if you can repeat, I hope I answered the question.
I think so, that Jewish individuals were allowed to have leadership positions, and this was a place and a segment of society where they were accepted and could play a pretty full role, unlike other parts of American society. So that did give us that did answer the question and help very much. I guess I'd love to ask you, you've written extensively on this subject, both Jacob Norton specifically and the larger context and sweep of Freemasonry and intersection with Jews. Can you tell us a little bit about your research? I'm aware that you did a lot of research in specific Masonic lodges. Tell us where this information lives and how you've gone about finding it.
Yes, so my PhD was on the French-Hungarian Freemason, this rabbi David Rosenberg, and I was sort of following his artworks, the reception history, and then this big artwork, The Origin of the Rites and Worship of the Hebrews, that I showed in the presentation, that I found also in the US, and but it was a bit different version. So there were, as it was relithographed, 2 other scenes were added, and so there was something weird going on. So I started to do research on this aspect, or this reception history. So in fact, I did quite a lot of research in the US, so in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, in Washington D.C., New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Lexington, in Masonic archives, in general archives, university archives, Yale and Princeton. And as I dug more and more into the materials, it's really a wealth of materials, and I started reading these hundreds of Masonic journals. I just started scanning articles in Masonic journals, anything on Jews, and also I checked the Jewish journals, what do they have to say about Freemasonry, and then I wanted to write to myself a little bit of background of Jews and Freemasons in the U.S. just as a background for this lithograph. And originally I was planning to have maybe 3 or 4 pages, and it just kept growing and growing, and I was already at like something like 50 or 60 pages, I remember. And so I just bumped upon this huge debate. So a whole new world opened up to me, and it was fascinating. And it was fascinating to find how this actually artwork became part of this whole debate on Freemasonry, and how it was used and mobilized by Jews who simply wanted to, put forward their own agenda, this Jewish origin of Freemasonry. So it was really fascinating. So this is how I got into this question. But certainly it could be and should be continued. It's very interesting.
It is very interesting. And you mentioned that you thought you'd go look in the Jewish press or media to see if there were any mentions of Freemasonry. Well, from what you told us earlier, there were many. The Jewish press really took this up, it sounds like. So fascinating. We have a question from Marlene. Is there actually, before I get to that, we'll take another couple of questions. Was Freemasonry one way to be included in modern upper class society? Jews did have their own groups of mutual support, so why were they joining Freemasonry? You've mentioned the connection, but is it all about sort of a place in
the
society?
whole point of joining Freemasonry, especially in the 18th century, was to be able to socialize with non-Jews and people from all walks of life. So this mingling with other people, that's really the unique thing about Masonic Lodge, was that it cut across traditional boundaries in society. So an aristocrat could sit next to a cobbler, a Jew next to a Christian. So it was really unique, and they called them each other brethren. And so it was something really unique, and they were trying to not only as they say to make good men better, so to work on their selves, but also, of course, on society. And this is the whole symbolism of you have the rough ashlar, the stone, and then you work on the stone, which means you work on yourself, and then putting these perfect ashlars together, this is how you build the temple, which is basically the society itself. So this was a common ground. So they found in these principles the minimum common denominator in society. So you can have your own views on religion and on politics. Actually, originally by the constitution of Freemasonry, religion and politics cannot be talked about in the lodge. Of course, but apparently outside it was very topical issue. But anyway, you can have your own views on this, but there's many things that much more that connects us, and so based on this we can build a society together. So I think this was a very it had an appeal for Jews, but of course not only Jews. And this was the main reason why Jews joined the lodges in the 18th century. And later on, it was also in vogue, and it was it was really the like little like a laboratory for democratic ideas and Republican ideas. So
I'll wrap up with one question. I'm actually going to tag on a quick second question. We do know that the connection between, Jews and Freemasonry took a darker turn. A lot of conspiracy theories kind of grew up around this. The Nazis, had a thing against Freemasons because of that connection. So Marlene asks, is there more or less prejudice against Freemasons today compared to, say the 20th century?
I don't think so. It's quite constant. So anti-Masonry is a phenomenon more or less of the same, more or less started at the same time as Freemasonry, a little bit after, but it's constantly there. So no, there's no less. And then it's gonna stay with us. I mean, you can just, if you Google Freemasonry, probably most of the hits, what you're gonna get is some kind of murky, nonsensical conspiracy theory. I personally do not research those. I mean, of course, I read about them and I bump into them all the time, but I'm more interested in what Freemasonry was and not in what Freemasonry was not. So, yeah.
Great answer. And the very last question, which I think you predicted might be asked, is, are you a Freemason?
Oh, no, I'm not. For a very simple reason. As a researcher, I think it's a bit better to keep a little bit of distance from the subject of your research, but that's all. Otherwise, I have, of course, nothing against Freemasonry, and at some point in the future I might even join, but for the time being I'm still just a curious outsider and historian.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for enlightening us today. We learned a lot from you, and we so appreciate your time and insights. We are a little bit past the hour, so I do want to thank Dr. Lanchidi and all of you in the audience for joining us. As you leave this program, you'll be asked to take a very brief survey, and we hope you'll take a minute to fill it out, as your feedback is very helpful to us for developing further programs. I invite you to learn more about the Weiner Family Jewish Heritage Center on our website, jewishheritagecenter.org. And I would like to mention that this free program was made possible by donations to the Jewish Heritage Center and American ancestors from people all over the world. We hope that you will consider making a donation of your own to support our educational and preservation work. I wish you a good evening, and I hope you'll join us again soon. Thanks so much, and goodbye until next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.